I'm Rick Zamperin, and this is the CHCH Newsmakers podcast. What does the future hold for Canada's temporary foreign worker program? Now, some people say it should be altered. Some want it scrapped entirely, while others say it is a vital component to the Canadian economy. Why the differing of opinion, and how does Tim Hortons factor into this conversation? Colin Mang is an assistant professor of economics at McMaster University and joins us on Newsmakers. Colin, thanks for coming out into the studio today and having this conversation with us.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.
So Canada's temporary foreign worker program was implemented years ago. How long has it been around, and is the original plan for it still applicable? Is it still achieving what it originally set out to do?
Yeah, so when we talk about temporary foreign workers, it's important to understand that there are different kinds of temporary foreign workers. So the actual temporary foreign worker program has been around for several decades, and that requires employers to undertake what's called a labor market impact assessment, or LMIA, to demonstrate that there are not Canadians available to take the job. And then they've got to apply to the federal government, then they can bring folks in to fill those roles. There is also the International Mobility Program, which is slightly different, and those give open work permits. You don't require an LMIA, and those workers tend to come in either as spouses of international students, or they can come in through some sort of employer sponsorship. And so there are different streams that we have of temporary workers coming into the country. So it's important to understand that there are those differences. There's also the third group, which is international students who are also given work permits when they come to Canada. So really, when we talk about temporary foreign workers in the country, there are those three different streams of people coming in. There is specifically, though, the temporary foreign worker program, which requires the labor market impact assessment. And I think that's the one that's become most controversial over the past few years.
Yeah, I did some homework and I looked at some stats. The number of temporary foreign workers in Canada in 2018 was about 108,000. That ballooned to 240,000 in 2023. Why the explosion? And you might have even more current numbers than I do.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that went on over the course of the pandemic. So the pandemic really changed the nature of the Canadian economy.
Okay.
The big challenge that we had, well, first of all, a lot of things were closed down, but most Canadians still went to work. They saved up money. So this was a very common thing during the pandemic. I mean, we look back at unemployment was about 12%, peaked at 14% in May of 2020. That's still 86% of Canadians in the labor force going out to work. But a lot of things were closed. We were told we had to stay home most of the time, couldn't go out and do anything. So a lot of people saved money. Right. All of a sudden, when the pandemic ended, well, we had a large number of people with a lot of money. There had been a lot of government stimulus that went into the economy during the pandemic. And it wasn't unique to Canada. This was also an issue in the United States, in Europe. People started to spend all this money that they'd saved. And this led to really rapid short-term economic growth. And as a result, unemployment fell. I mean, unemployment reached, by the time we got to June of 2022, unemployment was only 4.8%. And I mean, that was the lowest it had been in 2 generations. Yeah. The economy was overheating at that point. So the government was really worried that, first of all, well, inflation was coming, because if you've got a lot of people trying to spend money really rapidly and you've got businesses that can't hire workers to increase production, that number one, that's going to be that's going to constrain our economic growth. So that's one challenge. And number two, it's going to lead to inflation. I mean, partly it did lead to inflation. We had fairly high inflation through 2023 and even into 2024. And so the government thought, well, how do we solve this labor crunch? How do we head off rapidly rising prices, bring in more foreign workers? Okay. And so that was the answer that they followed. I mean, the challenge that we then faced was that this was a temporary boom, right? For 2022, 2023, this was people spending down the COVID money that they saved. This wasn't going to go on forever, but the government had opened the floodgates. And so as a result, we now have a pretty significant number of temporary residents in Canada. So as of March 2026, there were about 1.5 million people with a work permit, plus there were another about 670,000 international students in the country. Many of them had work permits as well. So that's a pretty substantial amount. When you look at the share of the labor force that is now made up of temporary residents in Canada, that's about 7%, a little over 7% today. And that's dramatically higher. So if you go back even just before the pandemic, 2019, it was only 2.6%.
That's a significant rise.
Yeah, pretty significant. You go back even further. So let's go back to, like, say, 2010. 2010, it was only 1.4%.
Wow.
Yeah. So we've had this massive growth in temporary residents here in Canada, almost all of them who have work permits. They now make up a very significant part of the labor force. And I mean, as a result, I mean, the government has seen that this is not sustainable. It's come with other challenges. So this rapid surge of people coming into the country, I mean, this is one of the contributors to the housing crisis nationwide, which I think you and I have talked about that before. The housing challenges that we had, we saw Canada's vacancy rate go from about 4% at the end of the pandemic down to less than 1% by 2024. It's now gone back up to around 3%, almost 4% over the past year and a half. And things have eased a bit, but bringing in this volume of temporary residents in such a short period had other economic consequences that the government had not foreseen.
Right.
And as a result, they're now looking at winding back that program to try to correct some of that imbalance.
Before we get to that, just back to the housing, the pandemic, the housing boom that we saw in like 2021, 2022, you know, people are saving up money. Now they're like, hey, you know what? Let's move to Hamilton or Niagara Falls from Toronto. We'll sell our $1.5 million homes. We'll buy a $680,000 house. We'll pocket the rest, spend all this money. And now you have these foreign workers that have come in. They need housing as well. Like, what a crunch that was and still is.
Yeah, it was. And that was actually one of the biggest contributors to inflation because, I mean, the way that we measure inflation with the Consumer Price Index, it's a weighted average of different things. Housing, it makes up almost 30%. It's the single biggest component. Food and transportation are the second biggest components. Each of those make up about 16%. But yeah, housing is almost 30% of that index. So as house prices were rising, as rents were rising throughout the country because of this crunch, that is actually what kept the inflation rate in Canada higher and for longer than it otherwise could have been. I mean, we were still seeing housing inflation run at 6 to 7% all the way through 2023. It's now come down, and actually for the last 4 months or so, housing costs have been increasing at less than 2% annually, which is less than the Bank of Canada's 2% target. That's one of the reasons why the inflation rate has been so low over the past 6-7 months. So that's come down, and even in Hamilton, I mean, we've seen home prices drop by about 20% from their peak back in 2023. And that's similar in many other places. Toronto, Vancouver have also seen drops. Halifax has seen a drop. So that's started to get better. Now, that's not to say that housing has become affordable. It's still unaffordable in many markets for many people here in Hamilton. I mean, a 2-bedroom apartment, average rent for a 2-bedroom is now about $1,600, which is quite a lot of money that you have to pay, and it's certainly much higher than it was 5 years ago. But as we've started to see the various temporary resident programs, both the temporary foreign worker program and the international mobility program start to be scaled back, that has taken a bit of the pressure off the housing market. our population here in Canada has actually shrunk in each of the last 2 quarters, projected to shrink this quarter as well, because there are now more people who are seeing their temporary resident permits end and they're leaving the country than there are new people coming in. We can talk about that a little bit more if you want to get into that. But,
definitely. I want to ask you about this, though. 3 years ago, 2023, United Nations officials said Canada's temporary foreign worker program was, quote, a breeding ground for contemporary forms of slavery. That's 3 years ago. Has anything changed? Has anything tweaked since then?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the reason for that comment was to do with the way that the temporary foreign worker program, and that's the temporary foreign worker program specifically, not the international mobility program, but the TFW program links the worker to the employer. Right. So the employer sponsors them to come, and then you can't leave.
Yeah, you get that job, but you can't move anywhere else.
That's correct. Yeah. Now, I mean, if you were abused by your employer, if there was harassed by your employer, you could go to the federal government, and then you could try to convert to an open work permit and then move to another employer. But I mean, when you're new to Canada, you don't really know your employment rights. Right. You don't know that that's potentially an option for you, and also you're not guaranteed to be converted to an open work permit allowing you to work anywhere. So one of the big challenges with the TFW program specifically is that when people came into the country, they had to work for that specific employer, or they had to leave. And for many of them, I mean, like, this job was their livelihood. I mean, they were coming to Canada to support their family back home. They needed that job. So, I mean, that's sort of where that comment came from, is because workers were tied specifically to that employer that sponsored them to come here. The
temporary foreign worker program is a vital component of Canada's agricultural sector. We've heard that from time to time again. How big of a factor is it?
Yeah, so that's interesting. So, I mean, when you look back at the history of the program, largely that's what it was made for. And agricultural workers, I mean, they're very different from like the temporary foreign workers that come and work in coffee shops or retail stores. The agricultural workers, they come just for the season. They move around. A lot of them will work in Canada. They'll also work in the United States because the growing season varies a little bit depending on where you are, because the weather changes. It gets a little bit colder up here more quickly, so the harvest comes first, and then they can move south. And a lot of them came from the Caribbean, or they came from Latin America. And originally, that's sort of what the idea of the program was, is that you were coming to Canada to work for a few months, and then they would all go home. Right? They were agricultural laborers coming for the harvest. They would move around. They would go back home to their families. Next season, they would come back. The temporary foreign worker program was originally conceived of as something that would be short-term and potentially for people who would go back and forth. It wasn't really initially conceived of this idea that you could bring in someone for years at a time to do a job that could otherwise be done by a Canadian worker. But that's sort of what it transitioned into over the past few years due to labor shortages and firms claiming that they weren't able to find enough workers.
And this was a way for them to retain that individual.
Yeah, exactly.
So I want to get your opinion on the CFIB, because that's one of the institutions that have said, listen, if we scrap this, because some people like Pierre Poilievre saying, you know what, we should get rid of this temporary foreign worker program. CFIB says 1.3 million work permits will expire by the end of 2026, threatening significant economic and labor challenges. Your thoughts? If we lost these workers, we'd have a very different country.
Yes. So, yeah, it's about 1.3 million by the end of this year, and actually about 700,000 of them are due to expire by the end of this month.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, now some of them will be extended. Some of them will actually be able to remain as permanent residents. So the government has substantially cut down the number of permanent resident cards that they give out. The original plan under the Trudeau government was to give out 500,000 per year. That's not sustainable at all to bring in that large number of people. So they've cut that to 380,000. But in the first 3 months of this year, 60% of the permanent resident cards that they've been giving out are going to people who are already here on temporary permits. So they're not actually bringing in a lot of new people into the country. They're just converting some of the people who are already here into permanent residents. Now, they're only going to give out 380,000, and there's 1.3 million people who have permits that are going to expire. So at least 1 million are going to have to leave by the end of the year. But some of them will be able to stay. In terms of what this is going to do to the overall labor market, again, this is why it's a bad idea just to snap your fingers and end the program. You want to gradually phase it out so that businesses have time to adjust. Those that have hired multiple workers, well, if one goes, you can replace them, and then another goes several months later, you can replace them slowly. You don't want like a mass exodus all at once. So, I mean, I understand that there are calls to scrap the program completely, but economically, yes, we should be winding it down, but we should do so over the course of a year or so, give businesses time to adjust, and also time to find new workers within Canada. It's also important to keep in mind that in Canada, traditionally, we've filled up our country with immigrants, right? Places that don't have large populations, we've invited new people to come and to join us here in our country. There are smaller rural communities that are still going to need to rely on immigration, whether that's temporary foreign workers or whether we can find permanent migrants to come. There will still be labor shortages in rural communities across the country. And so completely scrapping the program is not necessarily the best economic idea, certainly scaling it back. I mean, there isn't a lot of need right now for temporary foreign workers in major cities like Toronto, Hamilton.
There's enough people there.
Yeah, Calgary, Edmonton, Vancouver. We don't need temporary foreign workers coming into places like that. But into smaller rural communities, they will face persistent labor shortages because populations in those areas are aging. Kids who grow up there, well, they want to move to bigger cities where there's better job opportunities. So we will still need some international migration into those places, and offering some type of scheme to employers in smaller rural areas, smaller towns, smaller cities to be able to bring in workers to fill labor gaps would be good economic policy.
The thinking behind scrapping the program is if we get rid of it, we're just going to put Canadians to work. Does that make sense?
Well, yes. I mean, that is why we need to scale back the program pretty substantially. I mean, again, looking historically, you go back 15 years. In 15 years, we were looking at about 1.4% of the labor force was temporary residents. Today, it's 7.7%. I mean, scaling back to something where it's in the range of 2 to 3%, if we could go back in time, that would create more opportunities for Canadians, particularly for young Canadians who are struggling in the job market right now.
So Tim Horton's scaling back its temporary foreign worker program. They're hiring a bunch of Canadians, as they say. What impact do you think that is going to have? And do you think other similar companies are going to follow suit?
Well, I mean, I do hope other companies follow suit. I mean, it's a program. I mean, I don't fault employers for taking advantage of it. The government created this program, and it allowed companies to bring in workers who were going to work for them full-time. I mean, one of the challenges, particularly if you look at low-wage jobs, is that, well, you can hire teenagers, and some teenagers are really great, really hardworking. I know quite a lot. I mean, as a university professor, I've got a lot of these folks in my class. They're smart, hardworking, dependable, but they struggle to find jobs because they're only looking for jobs part-time. Right, because they're in school, and when it comes to midterm time, they want to work less hours. When it comes to exam time, they want to work less hours. And for employers, they may want someone who is a little bit more consistent in terms of the number of hours that they can work. And particularly if they can hire someone full-time, because if you hire someone full-time, I mean, it's less training cost, right? For the number of hours that you get out of them, if you get them full-time, I mean, that could be 2 or 3 part-time workers that you need to fill that gap.
Less training, less turnover as well.
Yeah, exactly. Well, especially if they're on the temporary foreign worker program, they can't go anywhere else. Like you've got them linked to your business. So I don't blame employers for taking advantage of the program. The government said you could do this. The reason we're in this situation, that was the Trudeau government's fault. 100%. They let the program run away. I mean, fortunately, we now have the Carney government that has seen the challenges with that and has really scaled back on that program, is trying to correct the mistakes of the previous government with that. But yeah, I don't blame employers for taking advantage of the program.
Mm-hmm. Where do you see the future of this program going?
Yeah, so, I mean, when we look at what the government is trying to bring in, so they've set targets for temporary arrivals now. For this year, it's 385,000, and for the next couple of years, it's down to 370,000. Interestingly enough, for the first 3 months of this year, they actually didn't make the target, so they're actually not on pace to reach the 385. I mean, unless we have a bit of a surge in September with new international students coming in. But of these new folks coming in, about 155,000 will be students. Only 230,000 will be coming in as workers. So it's a really substantial reduction from the literally like 1 million to 1.5 million we'd been taking in 2022, 2023. Right now, the number of temporary residents coming into the country is about 75% less than it was in 2024. So yeah, the Mark Carney government has really dramatically scaled back migration into Canada as a result, because of the negative consequences that we've seen with respect to the housing market, with respect to employment opportunities for Canadian youth that have built up over the past few years. Yeah.
It's a really interesting topic, and so too is CUSMA negotiations, as we switch gears a little bit, because Canada-U.S. Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc is in Washington to meet with his counterpart and I guess try to kickstart the talks that are going to happen later on this summer. What are your expectations? What do you think comes out of this meeting?
So I think we'll have to see. I mean, this is an interesting one. The American administration has been clear on some goals and not always on others. I mean, they dropped a really significant one last week. I mean, up until last week, they'd been saying, well, we want cars made in America. And that was going to be their line. And of course, up here in Canada, I mean, this is the future of our auto industry. And then all of a sudden last week, they came out with a completely different plan, which is that cars should have 50% American content. And I mean, right now, that's not written into the current agreement, but that's actually pretty close to the reality that cars made in North America have about 50% Canadian or 50% American content. And they're judging American content as stuff that is made in America, not necessarily stuff that's made by American firms. There are actually a number of Canadian auto parts makers who have plants in America. I mean, this is why parts flow back and forth across the border. I mean, you've probably heard the statistic that parts can flow back and forth up to 8 times before the car is fully assembled. I mean, this was a huge thing that I don't think a lot of people were expecting them to come out and make that as essentially their opening offer on the auto industry now that we're actually sitting down to negotiations. I mean, writing that into the agreement, it fairly closely matches the reality already. It's not going to be difficult for us to agree to. I mean, the other issues that we have with the Americans, so they want greater access to the Canadian dairy market. There are some challenges with that, not least that Canadian dairy producers obviously don't want that. There are some challenges in the United States, so they use bovine growth hormone as an injection in the cows to get them to produce more milk. In Canada, that is not permitted by Health Canada. They banned the use of that back in the 1990s. So there's a bit of a trade issue with respect to that. We'll see where that goes. There's the issue of steel and aluminum. The American administration actually last month, no, actually, it would have been in April, because we're now
happening fast.
We're now at the start of June, so it would have been about a month and a half ago. Yeah. They actually came out with a new plan that any company that makes a ton of steel in the United States, a new ton of steel, so if they expand production in the United States, they can import a ton tariff-free, which is an interesting idea. But if you look at, I mean, here in Hamilton, so you look at Dofasco, for example, or you look at Stelco, I mean, they're both owned by international conglomerates that have operations in the United States and have the opportunity to invest more in the United States if they want their if they want to export steel from Canada into the United States tariff-free. Who that does not help is Algoma in Sault Ste. Marie, because they don't have American production plants. But here in Hamilton, it actually helps the two steel plants because they're owned by international conglomerates. So, yeah, we'll have to see where that goes. I mean, that was just an American regulatory change about a month and a half ago to try to draw in international investment into steel. Maybe they try to write that into the agreement, or maybe we come up with something else. Right. That's going to be a tricky point, is the issue of steel and aluminum tariffs. Softwood lumber, I mean, that's been going on since the 80s. I don't think we're going to come to any resolution for that. But, I mean, Canada is going to have to negotiate. Mexico is going to have to negotiate. For Canada, we're in a very different position than Mexico because the Americans want most of what we make tariff-free anyway. Energy products, most manufactured goods, they're all going into the United States tariff-free. Agricultural products, it's really just been steel, aluminum, copper, cars, softwood lumber, and then access to the Canadian dairy market up here. So we don't have that much to negotiate with them on. We'll have to see where that goes, though. I mean, we are quite far apart in terms of what they want versus what we want, and what they're willing to give versus what we're willing to give. So, U.S.
Trade Representative Jameson Greer recently said tariffs are probably not going to go away, and even when the current president, leaves office in a couple of years' time, they'll probably still remain. Do you think that's going to be a sticking point in the negotiations?
Yeah, I mean, it's important to understand. So, like, the Canada-U.S.-Mexico agreement is not fully free trade anyway. It does give each of the countries sort of off-ramps for specific products, like the dairy industry. We could restrict American dairy products coming into Canada. So it was never a fully free trade agreement. So basically what we're doing is renegotiating the terms of what goods will be tariff-free, what goods will face trade barriers, whether that is tariffs, whether that's quotas, whether that's some other types of trade restrictions. So that's the situation that we're at. I mean, I don't expect that the new agreement will be exactly the same as the old one. There will probably be increases in North American content requirements for automobiles, and that could still work to Canada's advantage because we make a lot of the parts here. Mm-hmm. The Americans do seem intent on restrictions on steel. Maybe not aluminum. Maybe aluminum is something we can get rid of because they don't really make aluminum in their country. They need to import it in order to then refine it and turn it into things like aluminum cans, which they actually ship back to us because we don't make aluminum cans in Canada. Yeah. We make the aluminum, we ship it to the United States, and they send us back the cans, which is a good example of why free trade works, right? Because each country specializes in doing something and does it well. Convincing them of that is going to be the job of Canada's negotiators, that we're better when we work together. We'll have to see where it goes.
Mm-hmm. If this negotiation process drags on for months or who knows, years, is there an economic impact, either positive or negative?
Oh, huge. I mean, the challenge that we have today is that there has been an economic impact for the past year, all the uncertainty over where this negotiation is going. So you look at Canada's economy and sort of where we've been going. The biggest drop has been in business investment over the past 5 quarters. So business investment in Canada, for a variety of reasons, has dropped every quarter for the past 5 quarters. And partly that's been due to export restrictions, partly that's been due to just general trade uncertainty. This has also been a challenge in the labor market with businesses holding off on hiring. They want to see where this is going. And last year was particularly bad because the Trump administration kept changing its mind. We'd have 25% tariffs, then we'd have 50% tariffs. Yeah. We would have tariffs on all Canadian goods, and then 2 days later, oh wait, actually no, we're going to exempt almost everything that's in the free trade agreement. Oh, but now let's consider some punitive tariffs because we don't like this Canadian policy. Oh, you changed your policy, great, we're not going to have the tariffs now. the past year, because of the erratic nature of American trade policy, a lot of business here just didn't know where things were going. So they're hesitant to hire, hesitant to invest. If we just look at what's been going on in some of this stuff. So thinking about non-residential structure investment, so that's companies building new factories, new warehouses, new commercial offices. I mean, that was down again 0.8%. This most recent quarter, third quarter of last year, was down 1.5%. I mean, it's continued to fall. Overall, I mean, going back to we've had 5 quarters now where it's been declining, just total business investment in Canada. And the longer the negotiations go on, the more that's going to continue. I mean, I think businesses are hoping that we get some certainty this summer, that we get a negotiation done by the end of August, start of September, and then they'll know what the future looks like. They'll be able to make the big decisions, because otherwise, you're better off if you've got to make a 10 or 20-year investment decision, and this negotiation is probably going to end sometime this year. Well, you're better off just waiting until that negotiation ends. The longer the negotiation plays on, the longer those investments get pushed into the future. Right. And bad for the economy.
In the meantime, the Canadian government has signed agreements with China, European countries, NATO as a whole, to fill the gap and, to kind of go as the shifting dynamics with the United States kind of change almost day by day. We're looking to other countries to partner with. Do you see that accelerating even as CUSMA talks continue?
So it already has. Yeah. That's actually a key thing. So our exports generally have been increasing quite a bit. So our exports to the United Kingdom, for example, they're up 140% compared to last year.
Wow.
I mean, now they're up from a fairly small base, but our exports to China, last quarter, we're up 17% compared to the year before. In the fourth quarter of 2025, they were up 30% compared to the year before. Our exports to the European Union have been up over the past 5 quarters. They've been up between 20 and 30% compared to the year earlier. So even our trade with Mexico is up 1.4% compared to where it was last year. So Canada has been diversifying our trade in terms of looking abroad and doing deals with these other places. And I mean, I think it has worked that Prime Minister Carney's been traveling to all these places. I mean, we had a trade war with the Chinese up until January when he went to China. And it was actually a trade war that we started. So we started a trade war with the Chinese by putting 100% tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles. They retaliated with tariffs on Canadian agricultural products, Canadian seafood products, Canadian pork. And we've now seen those start to be wound back. So the first round of Chinese electric vehicles is expected to come into the country in the summer. They're going to come in at a low rate of around, I think, 6%. And the government's going to let 70,000 of them in. The key with that is that half of them, about 35,000, need to be priced under, I think, about $33,000, $34,000. So they need to be really cheap. I mean, the Chinese make these really cheap because labor costs there are lower, and they also make it at a massive scale. So that's going to be really interesting given how high gas prices have been over the past few months. A lot of people have started to look at electric vehicles as an alternative. And by the time we get to August, September, we're going to see a large number of very cheap, very high quality Chinese electric vehicles hit the Canadian market. So we'll have to see what that does. But yeah, Canada's exports to all these places have increased pretty dramatically over the past year. Even our imports from them. So our imports from Mexico have increased 17%. Our imports from the European Union have increased 14% last quarter compared to a year before. And if you think about what we've done with the United States, so our exports to the United States are down about 15% 4%. Our imports from the United States are down about 6.5%. So yes, I mean, there's already been an effect over the past year. We are trading less with the United States, both in terms of imports and exports. We are trading more, both in terms of imports and exports, with the European Union, with China, with the United Kingdom, with Mexico, looking to other trade relationships abroad.
Last one for you, and I'll get you to look into your crystal ball. We're in a technical recession with the economy going where it is. A year from now, what do you expect the Canadian economy to look like?
Yeah, so let's talk about that term technical recession before. So we've had 2 quarters where the total spending in the economy was smaller than the quarter before. Mm-hmm. But in the first quarter of 2026, it was about $1 billion smaller than the fourth quarter of 2025. That works out to 0.03% of our $3.2 trillion economy. So, and that's also within the measurement of statistical error. So a lot of people are saying technical recession because that's what the numbers show for now. Like it's not a major contraction that we're noting. Right. So it's more or less the Canadian economy has come to a stall at this point rather than significant.
Falling off a cliff.
Yeah. And I mean, part of that is, well, first of all, our population is shrinking. And secondly, businesses are really starting to hold back because they know that these trade negotiations are coming in. Like, I mean, there might have been investments that you needed to make in the third quarter or fourth quarter last year. At this point, there is no incentive to make any long-term investments because these renegotiations are literally happening within a couple of months. All you need to do is wait another 3 months, and then you know what the future is going to look like, and then you can start making those investment decisions. So the economy is stalling on this uncertainty because of trade relations with the United States. That's going to fade as we head into the summer, as we see how these negotiations play out. And I mean, I think the Americans really are under some pressure to get this deal done by the end of the summer, ahead of the midterms that are coming up. Any deal that they do sign, they're going to need to try to push through Congress before the end of the year, because when you look at the polling, it does look like the Republicans are going to lose control of the House of Representatives, maybe even control of the Senate. So whatever deal President Trump negotiates, they're going to need to try to push it through Congress by the end of the year. So I think they are under some significant pressure. And for us, I mean, the pressure is economic. The sooner the deal gets done, the better it's going to be for us because investment's going to start. So where I see the Canadian economy going, it's going to be somewhat slow going for the second quarter as well, which we're in right now, as businesses wait and see. By the time we get to the third quarter, starting in July, we're going to have a better idea where those negotiations go as we head into the fourth quarter later this year. I'm hopeful that those negotiations will be wrapped up. All the uncertainty will be behind us. We'll have a new track for the economy. We'll know one way or another how this is going to work out. And we'll start to see businesses making those investments again. We'll start to see the economy grow.
So we could have a boom or a mini boom perhaps in early 2027?
If the trade negotiations work out very favorably, we will definitely have a boom. If they don't work out so favorably, then there will be a bit of an adjustment period where the economy will continue to sort of stumble along for a little while, and then we'd probably be looking at returning to our typical level of growth sometime later in 2027. So by the end of 2027, yeah, the Canadian economy will be growing. It's just a question of when that liftoff starts. The liftoff could start as early as later this year if the negotiations go really well, or it could start by the end of 2027 if the negotiations don't go as well as we hope.
All right. Fascinating discussion. Thank you so much, Professor Mang, and we'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.
That is McMaster Professor Colin Mang. And thank you for checking out the Newsmakers podcast. A huge thanks to the all-star cast behind the scenes. If you like today's episode, click the thumbs up, hit subscribe. You can leave a comment as well. Catch the Newsmakers podcast on chch.com/podcasts and wherever you get your favorite podcasts.